The distant howl of a coyote pierced the veil of darkness as Nora Sullivan stood at the edge of her family's burned-out homestead, the acrid smell of smoke and ash still lingering in the crisp Colorado night air of 1875. With nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's old pocket watch clutched in her trembling hand, she faced the reality that everything she'd ever known was gone. The attack had been swift and merciless. Bandits, probably the same gang that had been terrorizing the region for months, had descended upon their small farm while she was in town. Her parents hadn't stood a chance. Now, at 22, Nora was entirely alone in a world that showed little mercy to solitary women. She sank to her knees in the dirt, the enormity of her situation crashing down upon her. The nearest town was Willow Creek, a half-day's ride, and she had no horse, no supplies, nothing but determination and the growing need for justice that burned in her chest. As dawn broke over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in strokes of amber and gold, Nora began the long walk to town, each step taking her further from the ashes of her past and toward an uncertain future. Willow Creek was a typical frontier town. One main street lined with a general store, saloon, hotel, and various other establishments necessary for civilization to maintain its tenuous hold in the wilderness. Nora's arrival drew curious stares from the townsfolk who recognized her, but seemed unsure how to approach the disheveled young woman with hollow eyes and ash-stained clothing. Sheriff Thomas was sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. "I'm sorry about your folks, Miss Sullivan," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "But I've got 3 men to police the entire county. Those bandits are long gone by now." "They took everything," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My parents, our home, our future." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "The widow Jenkins might need help at the boarding house. It ain't much, but it'll keep a roof over your head while you figure things out." That was how Nora found herself scrubbing floors and changing linens at Jenkins' boarding house, working for meager wages and a small room in the attic that leaked when it rained. But she was alive, and for now, that had to be enough. 2 weeks into her new life, the door to the boarding house swung open, bringing with it a gust of autumn wind and a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. "Got a room available." The man's voice was deep, with a slight rasp that suggested long days in the saddle and nights around campfires. Widow Jenkins emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Indeed we do, Mr. Blackwell, Flynn Blackwell." He stepped fully into the light, and Nora paused in her sweeping to take in the newcomer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind. A cowboy, judging by his worn leather chaps and the dust that seemed permanently embedded in the creases of his clothing. His eyes, a startling shade of green, met hers briefly before returning to the widow. "Just passing through?" the widow asked as she retrieved the ledger. Flynn nodded. "Got a job delivering horses to the Army outpost. Should be here a week or so." "Well, you're in luck." "We've got our best room available. Nora, show Mr. Blackwell to room 3 if you would." Nora led the cowboy up the narrow staircase, acutely aware of his presence behind her. "It's not much," she said, opening the door to reveal a modest but clean room with a bed, washstand, and small window overlooking the street. "But the linens are fresh, and it's quiet at night." Flynn dropped his saddlebags on the floor and glanced around, seemingly satisfied. "It'll do just fine, miss. Thank you." Their eyes met again, and for a moment Nora felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of some sort, though she couldn't have said what it was. She broke the connection first, nodding curtly before turning to leave. "Miss." His voice stopped her at the threshold. "Yes, you got a name." Nora Sullivan," he nodded, as if committing it to memory. "Nice to meet you, Miss Sullivan." Over the following days, Nora found herself increasingly aware of the cowboy's presence in the boarding house. He left early each morning, presumably to tend to his horses, and returned in the evenings covered in the dust of the day's work. He was unfailingly polite, tipping his hat whenever their paths crossed, but otherwise kept to himself. It wasn't until the fourth night of his stay that they had a real conversation. Nora was sitting on the back porch enjoying a rare moment of solitude after a long day of work when Flynn emerged from the shadows, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. She shook her head, and he settled himself into the chair with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "You're not from around here," he observed after a comfortable silence. "My family had a farm about 10 miles east," she said, her voice catching slightly. "It's gone now." Flynn took a drag of his cigarette, the ember flaring bright in the darkness. "I'm sorry to hear that." "How did you know I wasn't from town?" He exhaled a plume of smoke. "You don't have that look about you." "What look?" "Like you've given up. Most folks in these small towns, they've settled for what life's handed them. You still look like you're fighting." His observation, so casually delivered yet so accurate, caught Nora off guard. "Maybe I am," she admitted. "What happened to your farm, if you don't mind my asking?" In the darkness, it was easier to speak of the unspeakable. "Bandits. They burned it to the ground, killed my parents while I was in town." Flynn's silence was respectful, not pitying, and for that Nora was grateful. "The Harlow Gang," he said finally. "They've been working this territory for months." Nora's head snapped up. "You know them?" "Know of them. They're led by a man named Samuel Harlow, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly. They've hit a dozen homesteads across 3 counties. "The sheriff says there's nothing to be done," Flynn snorted. "Most sheriffs say that when the problem's bigger than they are." They sat in silence for a long moment, the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes filling the space between them. "Why horses?" Nora asked finally, changing the subject. "Pardon, you said you're delivering horses. Why that job?" Flynn leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "I understand horses. They don't lie, don't cheat, don't pretend to be something they're not. A good horse will give you everything it's got if you treat it right." "Unlike people," Nora observed, the corner of his mouth quirked up. "Unlike most people," he agreed. As the days passed, Nora found herself looking forward to these evening conversations with Flynn. He was easy to talk to, a good listener, and he never pressed when she fell silent. Sometimes they spoke of trivial things: the weather, the boarding house's terrible coffee, the eccentric guests who came and went. Other times they ventured into deeper waters, sharing pieces of themselves like rare treasures cautiously revealed. "I was married once," Flynn confessed one night, staring up at the star-filled sky. "Her name was Elizabeth. She died in childbirth 3 years ago along with our son." Nora's heart ached for his loss. "Is that why you took to wandering?" He nodded. "Couldn't bear to stay in the house we'd built together. Too many ghosts." On another evening, Nora shared her dreams of the life she'd once planned: teaching school, perhaps, or running a small shop of her own. "Silly notions now," she concluded with a self-deprecating smile. "Not silly at all," Flynn countered. "Dreams are what keep us moving forward." A week stretched into 2, and Flynn made no mention of moving on. The widow raised her eyebrows, but said nothing as he continued to pay for his room promptly each week. Nora didn't question it either, fearful that acknowledging his extended stay might somehow break the spell. It was on a crisp Sunday afternoon, when most of the town was at church, that Nora found Flynn in the stables behind the boarding house. He was brushing down a magnificent palomino, his movements gentle and methodical. "This is one of the army horses?" she asked, admiring the animal's gleaming coat. Flynn shook his head. "This is Goldie. She's mine." He patted the mare's neck affectionately. "The army horses are being kept at the livery. She's beautiful." "Would you like to ride her?" The offer took Nora by surprise. "I haven't been on a horse since." Since the day her world had burned to ash, Flynn seemed to understand. "Sometimes the only way past fear is through it." He held out the brush. "Here, why don't you help me finish grooming her, get acquainted?" Hesitantly, Nora took the brush and began running it over the mare's flank, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the golden coat. Goldie nickered softly, apparently approving of her touch. An hour later, with Flynn's steady hands guiding her up into the saddle, Nora found herself atop the Palomino, heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Flynn led them out of town at a walk, one hand on Goldie's bridle, the other occasionally brushing Nora's leg to steady her. "You're a natural," he encouraged as her confidence grew. "Want to try taking the reins?" By the time they returned to the stables, the sun was setting, and Nora's cheeks were flushed with color and windburn. For the first time since the attack, she had felt something other than grief and anger she had felt alive. "Thank you," she said as Flynn helped her down, his hands strong and warm at her waist. They lingered there a moment longer than necessary, and Nora found herself caught in his gaze, unable or unwilling to step away. "Nora," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Miss Sullivan." The widow's shrill call broke the moment. "There you are, I've been looking everywhere." "There's a gentleman here asking after you." Reluctantly, Nora stepped back from Flynn's embrace. "A gentleman, says he's from the U.S. Marshal's office," the widow continued, oblivious to the tension she'd interrupted. "Something about those bandits that attacked your farm." Nora's heart leaped. "I'll be right there." The marshal, a stern-faced man named Dawson, had indeed come about the Harlow Gang. "We've been tracking them for months," he explained, seated in the boarding house parlor. "They've grown bolder, more violent. Your parents weren't their only victims. Have you caught them?" Nora asked, hope blooming in her chest. "Not yet. But we believe they're planning something big, a bank robbery in Preston, the county seat. I'm gathering a posse to ambush them." He leaned forward, fixing her with an intense stare. "I understand you got a good look at some of the gang members when they rode through town before the attack," Nora nodded. "I saw 3 of them clearly. They stopped at the general store while I was there. Would you be willing to come to Preston? Help identify them if we catch them." "The territorial judge will be there next week for the circuit court." Before Nora could respond, Flynn's voice cut in from the doorway. "It's too dangerous." He stepped into the parlor, his expression hard as he addressed the marshal. "You're asking her to put herself in the path of men who wouldn't hesitate to kill her." Marshal Dawson frowned. "And you are a concerned friend," Flynn replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Those men are killers." "Which is precisely why we need to stop them," Dawson countered. "Miss Sullivan's testimony could be crucial." "I'll do it," Nora said firmly. Both men turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. "They took everything from me. If I can help bring them to justice, I will." After the marshal left, promising to return in 3 days to escort her to Preston, Flynn cornered Nora in the kitchen. "This is madness," he said, his green eyes dark with concern. "If Harlow or any of his men recognize you, then what?" Nora challenged. "What more can they take from me?" "Your life," Flynn said simply. The raw emotion in his voice made her pause. "Nora, please, I've seen what men like Harlow do to witnesses." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Flynn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. "Because in the 2 weeks I've known you, I've come to," he broke off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter, you've made up your mind." Flynn, but he was already walking away, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. The next morning, Flynn was gone, his room vacated before dawn. Widow Jenkins reported that he'd paid his bill in full and left without a word. Nora told herself it was for the best, that whatever had been growing between them was a distraction she couldn't afford. Still, the boarding house felt emptier without his presence. The evenings on the porch lonely and cold. 3 days later, Marshal Dawson arrived to escort her to Preston. The journey took the better part of a day, during which the marshal filled her in on what they knew of the Harlow Gang's plans. "We believe they'll hit the bank tomorrow, during the midday rush," he explained as their horses plodded along the dusty road. "We've positioned men throughout the town, ready to close in when they make their move." "And where will I be during all this?" Nora asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Safe in the marshal's office with a clear view of the street. All you need to do is confirm their identities. Preston was larger than Willow Creek, boasting a proper courthouse, several saloons, and a hotel that wasn't also someone's home. The marshal installed Nora in a small but comfortable room at the hotel, with strict instructions not to wander about town. "We don't know if Harlow has scouts watching the place," he warned. "Best if you stay out of sight until we need you." Confined to her room, Nora spent a restless night, her dreams haunted by flames and the echoes of gunshots. She awoke before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat, and moved to the window to watch the town come to life as the sun rose. By mid-morning, the street below was bustling with activity: ranch hands, shopkeepers, women with baskets of shopping, children darting between adults on mysterious errands of their own. Nora scanned the crowd, wondering if any of them might be members of the Harlow Gang, if even now they were planning their attack. A knock at her door startled her from her vigil. "Miss Sullivan," it was Marshal Dawson. "It's time." The marshal's office was across from the bank, offering an unobstructed view of the street. Deputy marshals and local lawmen milled about, checking weapons and speaking in low, tense voices. Nora was positioned at a window, partially hidden by a curtain, with instructions to alert them if she recognized any of the bandits. "Remember," Dawson said, "don't make yourself visible, just observe and report." The minutes stretched into hours. The midday rush came and went, with no sign of the Harlow Gang. Tension in the marshal's office ratcheted up as the day wore on with no action. "Maybe they got wind of our trap," one of the deputies suggested. Marshal Dawson shook his head. "They'll come. Harlow's too greedy to pass up this opportunity." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Nora's vigilance was rewarded. "There," she whispered urgently, pointing to a group of rough-looking men dismounting in front of the saloon across the street. The tall one with the scar and the man with the red bandana, they were in Willow Creek before the attack. Dawson moved to her side, peering through the curtain. "Good eye," he muttered. "That's Jed Hayes with the scar, Harlow's right-hand man, and the one with the bandana is Tom Corley." "Mean as they come." "What now?" Nora asked. "Now we wait for Harlow himself." The marshal turned to his men. "Get into position, but don't move until I give the signal. We want the whole gang, not just the foot soldiers." Another tense hour passed. Then, just as the bank was preparing to close for the day, a large man with a shock of white blonde hair rode into view, flanked by two others. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about him, an air of authority that marked him as a leader. "Harlow," Dawson confirmed grimly. And right on schedule. What happened next unfolded with the chaotic speed of a nightmare. Harlow and his men entered the bank while Hayes, Corley, and the others remained outside, casually spreading out to cover the street. Marshal Dawson waited until the bank door closed behind Harlow, then gave the signal. Lawmen emerged from storefronts and alleys, guns drawn. "U.S. Marshal, drop your weapons," Dawson shouted from the doorway of his office. For a heartbeat, it seemed the bandits might surrender. Then Hayes drew his pistol with lightning speed, and the street erupted in gunfire. Nora pressed herself against the wall as bullets shattered the office window. Outside, men on both sides fell. Through the broken glass, she could see Hayes and Corley taking cover behind a water trough, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The bank door burst open, and Harlow emerged, a canvas bag in one hand, a revolver in the other. He took in the situation at a glance and fired at the nearest lawman, dropping him where he stood. "Harlow's making a break for it," someone shouted. In the confusion, Nora lost track of the marshal. The gunfire was deafening, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of black powder. A stray bullet splintered the doorframe inches from her head, sending wooden shards flying. Suddenly, the door to the marshal's office crashed open. Tom Corley stood there, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder, his eyes wild as they fixed on Nora. "Well, look what we have here," he snarled, raising his pistol. "The Sullivan girl. Sammy said you might be a problem someday." Nora froze, terror robbing her of breath. Corley's finger tightened on the trigger. And then another shot rang out, and Corley's expression shifted from malice to surprise as a red stain bloomed in the center of his chest. He toppled forward, revealing Flynn Blackwell standing in the doorway behind him, a smoking revolver in his hand. "Flynn," Nora gasped. "We need to move," he said tersely, stepping over Corley's body to reach her. "Harlow's headed for the livery. He'll have reinforcements waiting." "How did you later?" He cut her off, grabbing her hand. "Right now, we need to get you somewhere safe." They slipped out the back door of the marshal's office into an alley. The gunfight was still raging in the street, but it had shifted toward the bank as the lawmen pressed their advantage. Flynn led Nora through a maze of back alleys, moving swiftly but cautiously. "The marshal's men have the situation under control," he explained as they hurried along. "Hayes is dead, and most of the gang members have either been killed or surrendered. But not Harlow," Nora surmised. "No, and he's the one who'll come for you if he escapes." They emerged near the livery stable just in time to see Harlow and another man leading horses out the back. "Stay here," Flynn whispered, positioning Nora behind a stack of crates. "Don't move until I call you." Before she could protest, he was gone, slipping around the corner of the building to approach the bandits from another angle. Nora held her breath, straining to hear over the pounding of her heart. There was a shout, then the sharp crack of gunfire once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then silence. "Nora," Flynn's voice. "It's clear." She emerged from her hiding place to find Flynn standing over the bodies of Harlow and his companion. The gang leader's cold eyes stared sightlessly at the sky, a bullet hole in the center of his forehead. "Are you hurt?" Nora asked, noting the way Flynn was holding his left arm. "Just a graze," he assured her, though the bloodstain spreading on his sleeve suggested otherwise. "Come on, we should find the marshal." In the aftermath of the gunfight, Preston resembled a battlefield. 6 men lay dead in the street, 4 bandits and 2 lawmen, and several more were wounded. Marshal Dawson, sporting a bloody bandage around his head, greeted Nora and Flynn with visible relief. "Miss Sullivan, thank God you're safe," when Corley broke into the office. "Mr. Blackwell saved my life," Nora told him. "And he stopped Harlow at the livery." Dawson's gaze shifted to Flynn, suddenly wary. "Blackwell, is it? And how exactly did you come to be in Preston at this precise moment?" Flynn met the marshal's suspicious stare evenly. "I've been tracking Harlow since he and his men killed my wife and son 3 years ago. When I heard you were setting a trap, I knew I had to be here." "You're a bounty hunter?" the marshal asked. "No, sir, just a man seeking justice." Flynn winced as he shifted his arm. "And now that Harlow's dead, I believe my business is concluded." The marshal studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's reward money for Harlow. $500. It's yours by rights." Flynn shook his head. "Give it to Miss Sullivan. Her farm was destroyed because of Harlow." "That's not necessary," Nora began. "I insist," Flynn said, his tone brooking no argument. It was 2 days before the doctor cleared Flynn to travel, his arm properly bandaged and healing. Nora spent those days at his side, first in the doctor's office and then in his room at the hotel. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their separate journeys. Flynn explained how he'd left Willow Creek immediately after their argument, intending to join the marshal's posse and ensure Nora's safety from a distance. "I couldn't bear the thought of you facing Harlow alone," he admitted. "Not after losing Elizabeth the way I did." "You never actually told me how she died," Nora said softly. Flynn's expression darkened. "It wasn't childbirth. That was a lie. Harlow and his men raided our homestead in Wyoming. They shot Elizabeth when she tried to stop them from taking our livestock. The baby came early from the shock and stress. Neither of them survived the night." Nora reached for his hand, her heart aching for his loss. "I'm so sorry." "For 3 years, all I've thought about is revenge," Flynn continued. "Finding Harlow, making him pay, it consumed me." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Until I met you. Suddenly, I found myself thinking about a future again." On the morning of their departure for Willow Creek, Marshal Dawson handed Nora an envelope containing the reward money. The territorial judge reviewed your testimony and the evidence, he said. With Harlow dead and the rest of the gang either killed or awaiting trial, he considers the matter closed. You're free to rebuild your life, Miss Sullivan. The journey back was considerably more pleasant than the trip out. They traveled at a leisurely pace, Flynn's arm still tender but healing well. They camped beneath the stars the first night, and as they sat beside the fire, the vast prairie stretching around them in all directions, Flynn reached for Nora's hand. "What will you do now?" he asked. "With the reward money, you could rebuild your farm." Nora shook her head. "I don't think I could go back there, too many memories." She gazed into the flames, considering. "Maybe I'll open that shop I always dreamed of. Willow Creek could use a proper dressmaker." Flynn was quiet for a moment. "And what if I suggested another option? I've got a small ranch in Colorado. Nothing fancy, but the land is good and it's far from any of Harlow's remaining associates." Nora's breath caught. "Flynn Blackwell, are you asking me to go with you?" He met her eyes across the fire, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I'm asking if you might consider building a new life with me." That night, as they lay side by side beneath a canopy of stars, Flynn's arm around her waist, Nora allowed herself to imagine that future, a home, perhaps children someday, a life built on something stronger than shared tragedy. It wasn't what she had planned, but then, the best things in life rarely were. Their return to Willow Creek caused quite a stir. News of the Preston gunfight had preceded them, and Nora found herself treated with a mixture of awe and respect by the same townsfolk who had once regarded her with pity. Widow Jenkins fussed over Flynn's injury and declared him a hero, while Sheriff Thomas admitted that perhaps he'd been too quick to dismiss the threat of the Harlow Gang. "What will you do now?" the widow asked over dinner their first night back. "Will you stay in Willow Creek, Nora dear?" Nora glanced at Flynn, who smiled encouragingly. "Actually, I'll be leaving soon," she announced. "Mr. Blackwell has asked me to accompany him to his ranch in Colorado." The widow's eyebrows shot up. "As his wife, I should hope," Flynn cleared his throat. "That is my intention, madam, if Miss Sullivan will have me." All eyes turned to Nora, who felt her cheeks flame. "We haven't discussed the particulars yet," she hedged. "Well, I should think not," the widow huffed. "There are proper ways to go about these things." Later that night, after the house had grown quiet, Nora found herself unable to sleep. The events of the past weeks, the loss of her parents, meeting Flynn, the confrontation with Harlow's gang swirled in her mind. Grief and hope warred within her heart, leaving her restless and tearful. She hadn't meant to cry, had thought herself cried out after all these weeks. But the tears came unbidden, soaking into her pillow as she muffled her sobs with the worn cotton. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Nora," Flynn's voice low and concerned, "are you all right?" She wiped hastily at her eyes. "I'm fine, just thinking." There was a pause then. "May I come in?" It wasn't proper, of course, but then nothing about their situation was conventional. "Yes," she whispered. The door opened and Flynn slipped inside, still fully dressed despite the late hour. He took in her tear-streaked face and was beside her in an instant, perched on the edge of her bed. "What is it?" he asked, his rough hand gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her damp cheek. "Everything's happening so fast," she admitted. "I'm happy, truly I am, but I'm scared too, and I still miss them so much it hurts to breathe sometimes." Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. Grief doesn't follow a tidy schedule, and happiness doesn't erase loss. He took her hand in his. "We can take all the time you need, Nora. There's no rush." "Would you?" She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Would you stay with me? Just until I fall asleep." In answer, Flynn settled himself beside her on the narrow bed, his back against the headboard, his good arm around her shoulders. Nora curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never believed I could feel this way again," Flynn murmured into her hair. "After Elizabeth died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But then I walked into that boarding house and there you were, sweeping the floor like you were waging war against the dirt itself. A watery laugh escaped Nora. Hardly a romantic first impression. It was to me, Flynn insisted. You looked like someone who refused to be broken, no matter what life threw at you. I admired that from the first moment. They talked quietly as the night deepened, sharing memories both painful and precious. Flynn spoke of his childhood in Missouri, of his parents who had died of fever when he was 16, of his years driving cattle and breaking horses before he'd saved enough to buy his own land. Nora told him about growing up on the farm, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, about the books she loved and the stories that had sustained her through difficult times. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Nora's eyelids grew heavy, her words slurring with encroaching sleep. Flynn's voice became a soothing rumble in her ear, his steady presence a bulwark against the nightmares that had plagued her for weeks. Her tears had dried, leaving behind a sense of peace she hadn't expected to find again. As sleep finally claimed her, Nora's last conscious thought was that perhaps happiness wasn't something you found, it was something you built, brick by brick, day by day, with someone who saw your broken pieces and loved you anyway. Flynn remained beside her until her breathing deepened and her body relaxed completely against his. Only then did he carefully extricate himself, pausing to brush a gentle kiss against her forehead before slipping from the room. They were married 2 weeks later in Willow Creek's small church, with Widow Jenkins weeping joyfully in the front pew and the entire town in attendance. Nora wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Flynn looked almost uncomfortable in his clean black suit, his usually windswept hair tamed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Nora thought of all the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment, the tragedy that had left her orphaned, the vengeance that had driven Flynn for years, the chance meeting at a boarding house that had changed everything. None of it made sense on its own, but together, it formed a tapestry of events that had led them here to each other. They left for Colorado the following day, their few possessions packed on a wagon Flynn had purchased with part of the reward money. As they crested the hill that would take Willow Creek from view, Nora turned for one last look at the town that had sheltered her through the darkest period of her life. Having second thoughts? Flynn asked, noting her backward glance. Nora shook her head, squeezing his hand. No. Just saying goodbye to what was, and hello to what will be. The journey to Flynn's ranch took 10 days, through rolling prairie and rugged mountain passes. Each night they made camp beneath the vast canopy of stars, learning the rhythms of their new life together. By day, Flynn pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels, while Nora marveled at the changing landscape and the endless possibilities that stretched before them. When they finally arrived at the ranch, a modest cabin nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains, Nora felt a sense of homecoming she hadn't expected. The cabin was simple but solid, with a stone fireplace and windows that caught the morning sun. A small creek babbled nearby, and wildflowers dotted the meadow that stretched toward the distant mountains. "It's not much," Flynn said apologetically as he helped her down from the wagon. "Nothing like your parents' farm." Nora took in the peaceful scene, her heart full. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. That night, as they lay together in the cabin that was now their home, Flynn's arm wrapped securely around her waist, Nora reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the ashes of her old life, something new and precious had emerged, a love born of shared grief, forged in danger, and now flourishing in the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. Her tears no longer soaked the pillow in the night, for the cowboy who had once laid beside her until sleep took her now held her through the darkness and into the light of each new day.